What if the next medical breakthrough could change thousands of lives? Welcome to Moving Medicine Forward, the podcast that pulls back the curtain on groundbreaking healthcare innovations. I'm your host, Jeremy Schrand, and together with CTI's leading experts, we explore the cutting edge of clinical research transforming patient care. Each episode, we dive deep into the stories behind medical advancements, featuring insights from global therapeutic experts who are literally changing how we understand and treat critical disease. From rare genetic conditions to revolutionary treatment protocols, we're not just discussing research, we're highlighting the human stories driving medical progress. On today's episode of Moving Medicine Forward, our very own expert, Dr. Richard Curry, Senior Medical Director, joins the show for a conversation about cell and gene therapy. We discuss how this newer modality of treatment affects trial design and the implications it has for the future of medicine. Let's dive right in. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Curry. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Jeremy.
Today we're talking all about cell and gene therapy. But before we get into that, what brought you to your career in clinical research?
My career was in the field of neuro-oncology. So I was a chemotherapy doctor for brain cancer. And one of the main areas of neuro-oncology is clinical research because we have limited options for our patients. So clinical trials is something that I got exposed to in all my training and something that we tried to bring to our patients in the clinic. I had the opportunity of working with a small pharmaceutical company here in the Northern Kentucky area who was developing a drug for glioblastoma. And during my time consulting with them, I met CTI and got to understand the world of contract research organizations. And after a couple of years of that relationship, I ended up making the decision to come over here and dedicate my career full-time to working on clinical trials and providing the medical input to help move those forward. And that's what got me into this world. And then now that I'm here, I'm being exposed to all of these new great therapies, not only in cancer, but in other disease types as well.
Why CTI specifically?
CTI, for me was a good personality fit. When I was in practice and when I was on clinical trials, I didn't know what a contract research organization was. I had not heard of the field, even though I was an investigator on trials. I just assumed that our team was communicating directly with a large pharmaceutical company. So I was quite naive in that. So my exposure to CTI was really my first education into this field. But the people that I was working with at CTI while I was on the sponsor side were just people that I felt like I could work with. They were easygoing, had a good culture, was able to meet Tim Schroeder multiple times, the CEO of CTI. And it was a very personal touch that I felt welcomed, I felt wanted here. And that was, I think, what attracted me.
Let's dive into some cell and gene therapy. You kind of touched on it, like these really revolutionary therapies and stuff. What interests you so much about cell and gene therapy?
What interests me is that it's still really in the beginnings, and I think it's an exciting way to approach medicine that's very different than what we've traditionally used. When I think of all my training, a lot of it would be, pills that you take to help with this syndrome, or an IV that you take for that syndrome. And not to say that their pharmacology is that basic, but it all felt somewhat the same. And in my practice, cell and gene therapy is not a standard therapy for the patients that I treated. So I knew very little, if any, about it. And then coming here, what's nice is we actually are working with these sponsors almost like we get to go under the hood early on. And we're working on things that the general public hasn't heard of and probably won't for, years to come. That's really exciting to me, is that cell and gene therapy is a new modality that we're hoping can manage chronic diseases or potentially cure very serious illnesses that we otherwise are not able to with our standard therapies.
CTI is known for its full spectrum research services. How does this model help accelerate innovation in cell and gene therapy?
I think the focus of CTI has been on challenging trials, more rare diseases, even though we are definitely expanding out of that. But I think that we are a CRO here that likes to take care of complex patients. In cell and gene therapy, it's very complicated. There are significant risks that the patients and their families are taking by joining these trials. And that's really the wheelhouse of CTI. And from all the experience that CTI has had over the years has been with very sick chronically ill patients, acutely ill as well. The challenge that this is not, not to, I guess, with a broad brush say that, hypertension is not complicated and serious, or diabetes. Those are much more mainstay diseases that affect so many people that it's at a place where it's quite well managed, and anything coming along there may not be revolutionary or that, I think, complex and dangerous potentially. Cell and gene therapy to me is exciting because you're really using all the science that you learned in your training and applying it in a really unique way to try and help these patients.
What are some of the most critical considerations when designing safety monitoring plans for these trials?
Sure. So I'll take one at a time. So for cellular therapy, what we're doing is taking actual cells from human beings. In a lot of cases, you're taking them from the patient, modifying them in a lab. So you're taking, say, white blood cells and modifying them in a lab with an actual virus, where the virus is then inserting code to make a protein that cell will express. And then we put those cells back into the same human being, with sometimes modifying their bone marrow even before with chemotherapy. And then these re-engineered cells are looking for a specific target. And that target in a lot of cases is cancer. It can be autoimmune disease and others, where you're trying to change the underlying biology of that sick patient with their own cells. So that's remarkable to be able to do something like that. But when you do that and you modify cells and you put that back into a human being and you are altering their immune system, there are some potential consequences. So patients can become hospitalized with high fevers. They can have very low blood pressure. They can get sick. They can get infected. So there are serious complications with them. And as there are more cell therapy trials conducted out there, we get much more familiar with the side effects. And then the doctors and the nurses and everybody in the hospitals can take care of those side effects earlier on with certain ways to ameliorate those potential side effects of the cellular therapy. So really with cellular therapy, you got to think the immune system. If you're tinkering with the immune system, you have to be ready for the immune system to get too active and hurt the person. And when you're tinkering with the immune system, then people can also become infected too. Gene therapy is a way that we're using these modified viruses. So they're not going to be viruses in the sense where they're going to infect you and make you ill, but they're actually going to infect the cells and deliver genetic material that the patient needs to replace a faulty gene. And a gene job then is to make a protein. And when we are missing that protein or having an altered protein, some function in that patient is significantly altered. And a lot of these rare genetic diseases, that's fatal, or it's extreme morbidity for these patients. So a gene therapy is putting a virus into a human being that has been altered to deliver the gene that it needs to express it. But when we do that, the virus and the protective capsid that it lives in, when they're put into a human being, there are consequences with that too sometimes, where it can affect someone's liver significantly. It can cause other, side effects depending on what the gene is that you'd be looking for. And it can damage other organs, and that it can be quite severe. You can have problems with, with anemia in your kidneys and all these breakdown products. So we have to be prepared for that. And as more trials are conducted again in gene therapy, we become more expert in how to prevent that from happening. So we have trials, in a lot of our trials, we will build it in where the patients will get treated with steroids from day one of that injection of a gene therapy, whether the gene's injected through a vein. They can be injected, in some of the trials we have, actually into the brain. It can be injected into the spinal fluid around the brain as well. And so there's different ways that you can administer that to the patient. And then you just have to be prepared for the side effects of that. So again, we will treat them with steroids or other medications to, kind of tamper down the immune system, that it's not overactive when it sees that it's being exposed to an external particle.
Yeah, so it's where that experience is crucial in trial design.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
How does CTI approach long-term follow-up and risk mitigation in the trials involving the genetically modified products?
Sure. It depends on how they're genetically modified. So different viruses that are used to create these products have different regulatory responsibilities. So some of them can be, up to a year, 2 years, 5 years, some of them up to 15 years. So knowing the product itself is how we design the long-term follow-up. And then what we do with our experiences is understanding what exactly needs to be tested in these patients, for how long and how frequent. And that influences how a protocol is written and what we communicate with the investigators in the hospitals of what their responsibilities are for these patients. And then for patient education, explaining to them, you're going to, get these cells or this gene therapy on this day, and we're going to see you every so often during the bulk of the trial. But after that 2 years, say, of the trial is up, or a year or 3 years, however it's written, we're still going to keep an eye on you for up to 15 years because we're still learning. So we're even though we're what we would say experts in cell and gene therapy, we always need to learn more. So these long-term follow-ups are ways that we find out how to safely monitor these patients. And that experience then influences the next trial and so forth.
That's awesome. So let's talk about the regulatory landscape. For these advanced therapies, it seems to be ever evolving. How does CTI stay ahead of the global regulatory expectations?
Our regulatory team, so the official name of our group is the Regulatory and Scientific Affairs. That group, that is their world they live in. So they are experts in the regulatory pathway and rules for here in the United States with the FDA, but in Europe with the European Medicines Agency, the MHRA in England. So there's different countries have different regulatory bodies, and each body may have a different approach.
Yeah.
So since we're a global organization, our regulatory team understands the rules depending on which country that clinical trial is being conducted. So because we are running these trials in this, that's how we are up to date on all of what the FDA requires, and even understanding what the FDA is going to require based off of feedback that we get. So I think the way that you get ahead of that is that you have to be running these trials all the time, and that's what we're fortunate enough to be able to do here.
Can you share an example of how CTI has helped a sponsor navigate a complex regulatory challenge in this space?
One example of how we helped a sponsor navigate the regulatory world with the FDA was a gene therapy company that was having some side effects with their product, and the FDA really wanted them to get a better handle on it. So they came to us and said, hey, can you help us? And we conducted a project with them where we looked into the data on this certain side effect that they were experiencing, and we were able to identify risk factors, and then went back to the agency, to the FDA, and say, these are the 2 risk factors that we found. And moving forward, if these risk factors are identified before treatment, these patients would not be eligible. And it was a way to mitigate that risk.
Yeah.
And so that sponsor was able to then continue their trial because of that experience that we brought them. It was a small sponsor, they needed the external help. And based off of our understanding of what the agency was looking for and our experience in that field, where we are already familiar with that side effect, looking into the data for us was really not a hard task because we were well prepared for that.
What sets CTI apart from other CROs when it comes to supporting cell and gene therapy programs?
I think it's a focus here. I can't speak for other CROs and what their priorities are, but I know at CTI, when we talk about cell and gene therapy, we talk about it as regenerative medicine. And regenerative medicine is a pillar here. That's something that we have a lot of experience based off how CTI evolved and all the expertise that we have. And it aligns well with the mission of treating critically ill patients, being more in the space of rare disease, and helping the patients and their families, navigate this crazy world that they've unfortunately been put into. And so I would just get back to it's the focus here.
How does CTI's patient first philosophy influence the way we design and execute these kinds of trials?
The patient first philosophy, I think that comes from the rare disease priorities here. So rare diseases, meaning that not a lot of patients have them. And when you have to run a trial like that, you're going to coordinate efforts between far distances and a small number of investigators, a small number of sites. So you have to put your focus on the patient, in their shoes. What is it going to be like for them to actually enter this trial, and what does it take to get them through it? And that, I think, translates to all of our trials. So even though we're in trials that are not rare disease, where there may be hundreds of patients or even thousands, try not to lose focus of that the way that the trial is designed, if it's not patient friendly, it's probably not going to succeed.
Let's take a look at the future. What trends or innovations in cell and gene therapy are you most excited about right now?
My world that I've lived in has been in the cancer world. And so the cellular therapy has done quite well with hematologic malignancies, which are blood cancers, like myeloma, leukemia, lymphoma. So there are some established FDA-approved therapies there. In the solid tumor world, that's where I'm excited to see where it goes, is that we have so many solid tumors that are out there, lung cancer, breast cancer, melanoma, et cetera. And can we get to a time when cell therapies are effective in treating those cancers? We are seeing a lot of companies coming out that are targeting that. So we are, and myself in particular, very excited for solid tumors and cell therapy. In autoimmune diseases, cell therapy is coming too. So in my background years ago in neurology, I treated multiple sclerosis patients. That's an autoimmune type disease. So thinking that you can put cells into a patient with multiple sclerosis and help potentially reverse their disease when other therapies that are approved cannot, it would be very exciting. And that applies for all autoimmune diseases, not just MS, that's another really exciting forefront. In gene therapy, it has been with a lot of rare diseases where there's one gene that has been altered, but is there a way that we can expand that out? So a trial that, I've been involved with is gene therapy in Parkinson's disease. So something like neurodegenerative disorder that is not just like, oh, this is the gene, this is the problem, but actually bringing in a gene that may help, multiple patients that have different genetic subtypes, that would be very exciting. So neurodegenerative disorder is another area for gene therapy. So you see that it just starts expanding out farther and farther. When you get a little bit of success, then you can see where it can go from there.
How is CTI preparing to support the next wave of therapies, including personalized and regenerative medicine?
I think the support there is providing a great service. And when we help a sponsor in cell and gene therapy and they're successful, that partnership hopefully grows. And then we're able to help them in more programs, which is more patients. And then if you certainly have a good reputation, then other sponsors seek us out when we can say, hey, these are the trials we run and this is the outcome. You want to work with us. So I think that's really, a big part of our future here is provide excellent service and you're going to have, excellent options.
Yeah, one more question for you before you go.
Sure.
So what message would you like to share with patients, families, and sponsors who are invested in the future of cell and gene therapy?
A couple things. One, for patients who are on it is certainly appreciation. I can't imagine what that's like to be presented with a situation where I had to put cells into my body that were altered by a virus or have someone inject a gene into my brain. That's very scary. So, appreciation to those patients in the past that have taken part in these trials. And then for patients in the future, if they have a disease where they need more than what is just out there with standard of care, is to consider these, if cell and gene therapy is potentially an option, even though, it can sound a little bit overwhelming, is this is the science that could take us to the next level for a number of diseases. And we have a good handle on the safety. And so I feel confident that the safety for these patients, certainly the benefit would outweigh the risk if they were presented with that. So I would just have them investigate and of course, read up on it and see what the scientific rationale is for why they're presented with something as, powerful as regenerative medicine.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Rich. It's always a pleasure to hear you and have you come and bring your experience to the podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeremy. Have a great day.
That was Dr. Rich Curry, Senior Medical Director at CTI, with an interesting discussion on how cell and gene therapy is moving medicine forward. Thank you for listening. If you enjoy discovering how medicine is moving forward, or you are interested in how CTI could help you with clinical research, be sure to subscribe. Follow us on social media or visit our website at ctifacts.com.